RotoGrinders. Welcome to DFS pregame show here on RotoGrinders. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka Blenderhead. You can follow me at BlenderHD on Twitter if you want. And this is Monday. You know what we do on Mondays? It's Mondays with McCool, James McCool, paydirt_DFS, the co-author with me on the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports. It's a 15-hour audio DFS masterclass that you can pick up at theoryofdfs.com. Obviously, give me thumbs up in the morning here. It's Monday morning. Thumbs up, subscribe, scribes, and the notification bells. I'll be back later tonight. I've 4 shows today, so I'm doing Grinders Live for NBA. I'll be back for the pre-lock show. You'll be seeing me all day here on the RotoGrinders YouTube channel, and you can always post your comments and your questions that we could get to in the YouTube chat. James, what wasn't a good week for me? Yesterday was not good. Yesterday, 20 GPP lineups, technically 80. 20 main GPP lineups. Yeah. None of them cashed. Yeah. Like not a single one. And the other 60 were just permutations of those 20, and 3 of them cashed.
There we go.
So I was able to get 3 over the line in like the slant or the flea flicker that were essentially 2v2s off of all those the same 20 lineups. I don't know what I took a shot on a game. I put that piece of that game in almost all my lineups, and the game sucked, right? And to be fair, I said that on multiple shows. Carolina, Atlanta, like anytime you get crap versus crap or good versus good, it's very similar to MMA. Like what ends up happening, you sometimes you see 2 great fighters fighting against each other, go, oh, this one's going to be a banger. And because they're both so technically good, it ends up being a very slow, like they're both hesitant to do anything and make a mistake. So the fight actually becomes like a dud. Yeah. Sometimes you see them, sometimes it is a bang. Sometimes absolutely 2 great fighters against each other. Same thing for the horrible guys. Low level, you'll see, sometimes it's just 2 people that clearly shouldn't belong in there and can't land the punch because of it. And then sometimes they shouldn't belong in there because they're just completely reckless and sloppy, and the whole fight is just like it's like a bar fight. Yeah. And points galore, right? Or 2 grapplers. You see that a lot. 2 grapplers face up at high-level grappling. There's going to be a lot of points scored on the ground. They're going to go this and reverse, and then it ends up being a staring contest for 3 rounds because no one wants to make a mistake. Oh, I know that guy's a great grappler and a black belt in jiu-jitsu, so I'm not going to just go in and just try to just take him down. So to me, I viewed the Panthers-Falcons game as this is the disgusting game. Disgusting can mean what happened yesterday. Mm-hmm. Or it could mean that it's 44-38. Like it's going to be one, either the defenses are horrible and they just run up and down the field, or the offenses are just absurdly inefficient and nothing ever gets done. And it just so happened to be that one. And also it doesn't help that I was perfectly fine with the lineups that I made Saturday night. I'm like, I got my lineups. They're done. Like nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to change. And then at 11:30, Calvin Ridley says, I don't want to play football anymore. And I had Calvin Ridley in half my lineup. So it's not like I can leave it be. It's not like, oh, now I got to start jamming in Falcons. It's just like, no, I have the most of this game. I gotta rework all of my lineups now. Yeah. So did you have to do very similar things, out of the blue? Jamal Williams is out, right? We saw that.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the
that didn't affect me to me, that didn't affect me as much. I think people bumped up Swift a little too much.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know that I bumped him up all that much. I mean, I gave him the majority of the running back work, which was right. I mean, the only 2 guys they had behind him, I couldn't pronounce the name of one of them, and the other one was like a practice squad guy. So giving DeAndre Swift like a 75-75 split of the rush work and the touchdown work, I think that's fine. So like bumping him up to that, I don't have a problem with that. And I didn't mind having him. I had him on all 3 of my lineups. 7,100 for a guy who gets wide receiver one work and then should be getting all of the running back work, even on a bad team. Like we've seen guys succeed even on a bad team in that situation. Obviously, Jermar Jefferson, who is a practice squad guy, gets the touchdown later in the game. And then
it was so out of hand. It was so out of hand. There's no point of even having
no.
Like the game was so far out of hand that like it's they'll get garbage time work. It's like what were the Lions favored in this game?
Yeah, no.
Oh, they were only a 3-point dog or something, right? But I mean,
it was close. It was a close one,
right?
But yeah, I don't know, DeAndre Swift, and plus, I was high on Philadelphia as well because I think Jalen Hurts is fantastic for fantasy. I don't think he's a very good real life quarterback, but I think he's great for fantasy.
But he needs to be playing from behind.
Well, that's what people keep saying. Yeah, I know. Yeah, so I bumped up Swift a bit. I already had him projected for 18 or something like that, just purely off the rushing work. And then when he gets that much of or simply off the receiving work, then when he gets that much of the rushing work, bumped him up another couple points. So he was a fantastic play. Had a lot of him. The Calvin Ridley news, I don't know how much it hurt me, except that there was no way I was going to play Kyle Pitts, and then I played Kyle Pitts. And I guess that hurts me. Kyle Pitts ended up with 3.3 fantasy points. I guess the thing that hurt me more was that I then prioritized Kyle Pitts, which then said, oh, well, now I want to make sure that I get a comeback for him on the secondary correlation. Let me plug in Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson gets 0. Panthers just look like an actual rotting pumpkin. So I think that news kind of hurt me a little bit, but I wasn't ever going to really stack that game. I didn't want to stack Carolina. I don't really think that they are a very good stackable team right now in the way that they do things. Atlanta, I was fine stacking. I was okay going with Matt Ryan. The way that I wanted to do it, actually, I talked about it on my stream yesterday and I wrote about it in my notes. I wanted to do Matt Ryan with Cordero Patterson and Kyle Pitts before Calvin Ridley got ruled out. Mm-hmm. Because that way of building gives you so many options across the board, not including a wide receiver in your stack at all is a really interesting way to build. You can build out multiple secondary correlations with wide receivers in that way. I really liked that. So I did have some interest in Atlanta. I didn't prioritize them, but I did want to have Cordero Patterson. I did want to have Calvin Ridley. I had Calvin Ridley in lineup before he got ruled out. But yeah, that news that hurt a lot of people, I think. And the thing that hurt the most on it, I think, is it kind of made it so with the Jamal Williams news and with the Calvin Ridley news, it made it so that Cordero Patterson, who I thought was a good play again, gained a lot of ownership. And DeAndre Swift, who was going to be somewhere around you got to think 20 to 25% owned, even at 7,100, it skyrocketed his ownership. So then you have a lot of extra ownership on these plays that ended up, Cordero Patterson was okay, but DeAndre Swift sucked. So it just kind of threw things through it made things so weird from an ownership standpoint that it made me hesitant to do certain things and made me feel like I needed to do other certain things, like having a lot of DeAndre Swift. If DeAndre Swift is 20 to 25% owned, yeah, he's a good play. I was fine having him in one, maybe two lineups. Maybe I have him in my Philadelphia as the comeback, but I probably wouldn't have prioritized him the way that I did. So I think that probably hurt me the most. But the Calvin Ridley news, I was okay with an Atlanta stack, but I wasn't prioritizing.
I was on the Panthers the whole time. I look at the Millie ownership. Sam Darnold, 4%. DJ Moore, 8%.
Oh, no, I understand why you were on.
Robbie Anderson, 4.8%. If you took a look at all the ownership for the Panthers, the ownership was higher in the higher stakes, smaller field.
Yeah, I understand why you're on.
I'm going in the right direction. It feels like I'm going in the right direction. And the Falcons, if we take a look at the lower states. So Millie, Ryan, 6%. Let's see. Did anyone play? Calvin Ridley was still almost 1% owned in the Millie. Russell Gage, 11% in the Millie. Pitts, 14%. And Patterson, 12%. My attitude on this was not on the Falcons, more on the I was on the Panthers. The Falcons just happened to be subsidiary. guys that I had more Darnold, Anderson, more stacks with. Before the news, I had Ridley, Pitts, and Patterson as run backs.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's not like as I was necessarily stacking the Falcons. So now Ridley's out. So now I add Gage to the player pool as a run back, and I run my lineups again. But obviously, the difference between Ridley and Gage, there's a price difference.
Yeah.
Right. And the positional, and obviously Patterson's projection goes up. So like it changes all my lineup constructions.
Mhm.
And from my perspective, the games that were over-owned, I think the Bills game was over-owned.
Agree.
If we take a look here, Emmanuel Sanders was 20% in the millie with a 0. I was playing Bills one-offs, but I was primarily playing Cole Beasley. I had Beasley projected well in my aggregate. He was 12% owned in the millie. I think I played Diggs in one lineup because he was just over. DJ Moore projected better than him for lower price.
Right.
So he was 10% owned. And Josh Allen was 13. Yeah, Josh Allen was one of the highest owned quarterbacks. So it's like, okay. Doesn't mean I don't have any Bills. I did have a couple of, I think 3 out of 20 Allen stacks.
Mhm.
Tommy Sweeney in the tight end spot. Something like that. And I thought the other over-owned game was the Colts-Titans game. I when I saw the Pittman ownership when the slate locked, I said to myself, it's like, no matter what happens, I'm perfectly fine with what I've done. When I see 26% ownership on Michael Pittman with T.Y. Hilton back and everyone healthy, I just go, why? Like, it's not like I thought Michael Pittman, he was in my player pool, but I purposely attached him to AJ Brown. I said, Pittman, I thought Pittman was going to be like 18% owned. And
I had him at 18.31. Yeah.
Right. If I thought it would be 18% owned and still over owned compared to other receivers in that range at 18.
I agree.
So at that point, I thought AJ Brown would be over owned. I had AJ Brown at around 16%, I believe. Somewhere, let's see, what would I put in for AJ Brown? AJ Brown, 16. AJ Brown came in at like 14 or 15. But I thought that if they're both going to be over-owned, like I might as well just play them together if I'm going to play them and not play them as one-offs.
Yeah.
Of course, I didn't get to any of those lineups out of my 20.
I was blown away by the Michael Pittman ownership because I had
it got there. It doesn't matter. It still got there.
I don't care. Like I was annoyed.
I know. Well, that's the point that I'm making. I'm just trying to a teachable moment of like I weigh my decisions at lock.
Yeah.
Like once lock hits and I see the ownership and I go, would I have changed any decisions that I would have made? And if I say no, like what am I going to do? Like I had a bunch of James Robinson. He got injured. So like, what am I supposed to do? But I see that James Robinson was actually decently owned. I played a whole bunch on DraftKings. I played a whole out of my 20 lineups. I think I had 8 lineups with Michael Carter. And I had 7 lineups with Eli Mitchell. Like I got the cheap running backs right, just that they're filled with DJ Moore and Kyle Pitts in those lineups, and it doesn't matter anymore. But I mean, but essentially, when you review the slate, like what would you have done had you known?
Mm-hmm.
And like had I known Michael Pitts was going to be even way higher on than I thought, like he wouldn't have made any of my line. I mean, I wouldn't have even thought about it. I just said no. I mean, I take a look at this range. Okay, this is what I need to. I know we dug over the weird projections. This isn't a weird one. This is what I didn't get in this range. Okay, let's take a look at this 5K wide receiver range. Okay, let's go from even down a little bit lower, like at Cole. Okay, I'm going to include Cole Beasley in this.
All right.
Okay, so I'm looking for basically the receivers I'm looking at in this range. Brandon Cooks at 5,700, Devontae Smith at 5,500, Emmanuel Sanders at 5,400. I guess you have to throw him in. Michael Pittman at 53, T. Higgins at 52, Jacoby Myers at 51.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we just look at those guys, like which out of all those guys in my aggregate, Brandon Cooks projected the highest. He's also the most expensive at 5,700. So what did you have Brandon Cooks at?
Brandon Cooks at around 15.
Okay, I had 16.5.
Sure.
A little bit higher. Okay, let's just go down. What did you have Devontae Smith at?
Around 15.
Yeah, 14 and a half. So
yeah,
even you had him for maybe a little bit higher than I did.
I had 14.6. So
I had 14.59.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not off. Emmanuel Sanders, I had 13.
I had 12.
Okay, yeah, so lower. That's I threw him in. T. Higgins.
What did you have?
I had 15 for T.
Higgins. I had 13, so I was lower on T. Higgins. I was lower this week on Buffalo and Cincinnati. So
okay, how about Jacoby Myers?
I had 16 for Jacoby Myers.
I had 14.9, so you were even higher than my aggregate on Jacoby Myers. How about Cole Beasley? I had 12.6.
I was really low on Cole Beasley. My models never like him. I had him at like 7.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's way off. And
then
what was Michael? What did you have Michael Pittman for?
I had Michael Pittman for 15.5.
Oh, and I 14.36.
Sure.
So we're a point off. You had him for a point higher, but still, even at a point higher for you, he was still over-owned.
I had him, if he comes in at 18% owned, I had him as basically 7% over-owned. I had his efficient ownership around 11.
Okay. If he came in at 18%.
If he came in at 18, comes in at 27 in the power suite. So 16% higher ownership than I think he should have had.
Yeah, but in comparison to all these numbers, even if you had Pittman at 15 and a half, there's no reason. Like, I'm going to go through all the, this is the millie, to use an example of that's what we're projecting the ownership for. Obviously, in different contests will be different. So if we go by Brandon Cooks in the millie was 5.6% owned. Okay. T. Higgins, 11.6. Okay. Jacoby Myers, 4.9.
So low.
Beasley, if you want to include him, 12.8. Devonta Smith, 12.3. Emmanuel Sanders was obviously high owned. And then Pittman was 26.5. Like Pittman was
out of nowhere.
Pittman was twice as owned than T. Higgins. Like Higgins and the millie was 11.6, and I projected him for 20% ownership. So I thought he was over-owned for the millie. So like looking at the projections of all these receivers that we're looking at, even if you put Michael Pittman at 15 and a half, like the ranges of all these receivers are close enough that none of them should be twice as owned as any of the other guys. And definitely not 4 times as much owned. Like what's the reasoning behind Michael Pittman being 27% owned and Devonta Smith being 11% owned and Brandon Cooks being 5% owned?
I legit don't know. I didn't even see him talked about that much. I heard all Mike Wentz, Pittman, Brown. If Julio's out, Wentz, Pittman, Brown. I heard a ton of that, but it was all on the basis that T.Y. Hilton wasn't playing. T.Y. Hilton's that would have made sense. That would have made sense.
That would have made sense. No, but even with T.Y. Hilton in, I have my projection at 14.36. I mean, like it did. Like if T.Y. Hilton was out, Pittman probably would have gotten up to 16 and a half or 17.
I was going to say 17 or so. Sure.
Right. And then I think his efficient ownership would have been around 20%.
Yeah, sure.
In that range, in the 53. Then it makes a little bit more sense. And I would have ended up playing him in cash, which I didn't.
Oh, I would have had Michael Pittman in cash.
Why?
I played. Because he was high owned.
I didn't know he was going to be that high. I thought there's enough guys like.
Well, okay, so
there's enough ownership out there, especially because I had Ridley in cash before 11:30. So I'm like, I basically my receivers were Ridley, Godwin, and Higgins.
So
I'm like what's the need for Pittman?
If I'm looking at it like ad hoc, right? If I'm looking at it now, DeAndre Swift, obvious. Cooper Kupp, obvious. Daryl Henderson, obvious. Chris Godwin, obvious. Those are the only 4 guys that I had projected above Michael Pittman's ownership. So if I'm building out a cash lineup, I'm going to start with DeAndre Swift, Cooper Kupp, Daryl Henderson, Chris Godwin, Michael Pittman. I think that I also probably would have dropped Cordero Patterson in after the Calvin Ridley news.
Okay. I mean, I was debating.
And then
He was
gone
part of my thought process. But I mean, he's only, but he's valid. He's only running back.
Yeah. Well, I think so. You'd use 3 running backs, right? Use Daryl Henderson, DeAndre Swift. And
I didn't use 3 running backs. I mean, you could have.
I think I would have.
Okay.
Well, so I mean, Joe Mixon right there at 6,900. I guess Joe Mixon was another cash game back, right?
Maybe more on FanDuel.
That makes sense.
I played DJ Moore in cash.
Okay, sure.
What was your projection on? Okay, let's go to this. What was your projection on DJ Moore?
17.
20.4.
That's why you had him in cash. All right.
Okay, so
Sure.
when people think of like, oh, why did you play DJ Moore in cash? It's like, well, based
That's
on
why.
the numbers I'm looking at, why shouldn't I play him in cash?
Yeah, I can't argue with that. And if you have him projected,
And remember, we're using an aggregate. If I use the blitz was even higher than that. I mean, like,
I believe that.
I'm not. It's not like you had 17, but most of the 18, 19s at least.
Mm-hmm.
So you take a look at even a DJ Moore 19 puts him above Debo, above Chase, above everyone other than Cup, above almost to Diggs for 7,200.
Yeah.
And I'm already building that type of construction. So I'm like, Moore. I played Moore. I played who did I play? And so I played. I ended up playing Devontae Smith in cash because I wanted 4 receivers.
Okay.
I didn't. The thing about Cordell Patterson was I knew playing DJ Moore. It was one of those things. Either you went up or down.
Mm-hmm.
There was a build with Cooper Kupp and Van Jefferson, if you wanted to do it.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or Cooper Kupp and Russell Gage, if you wanted to do that. Or something like when you went up and down, and then you still had like a 6K. Then you still. To me, I figured Godwin was. I needed to lock in Godwin. I needed to lock in Henderson. I needed to lock in Swift. I needed to lock in Hurts at quarterback. So once I locked that in, I mean, I could even show you. Once I start locking these things in, it's like, what do I get? Like either I'm going to get Cordell Patterson and like Brandon Cooks, or I'm going to get a 50. I had Devontae Smith. Understand, I had Devontae Smith projected higher than Pittman. So I had Devontae Smith at 14.59 and Michael Pittman at 14.36. I had Jacoby Myers at 14.9, higher than both of them. I had T. Higgins at 15. So my natural construction, if I didn't want to play Patterson, was a 4 wide receiver build with Moore, Higgins, and some 5K level receiver, either Devontae Smith or Jacoby. It would first go Devontae Smith, then go Jacoby Myers, then go Michael Pittman. Mm-hmm. And then my Dan Arnold in the tight end spot and the Washington defense. But when I did the Devontae Smith lineup, I could have put Jacoby Myers in there and then played the Jaguars defense. But I thought the Washington defense was going to be like the most owned. So like, why am I not playing it? So playing Godwin in the flex allowed me to have the late games being Arnold, Godwin, Washington.
Yeah.
But once I have that, James, if I get anything wrong, those are the 3 chalkiest pieces outside of Henderson. Those are the 3 chalkiest pieces of my lineup, and I could easily switch. And the 3v3 was Jared Cook, Jacoby Myers, and the Seahawks defense. So I'm like, if this lineup right here projects nearly the same as that Cordell Patterson lineup with Jacoby, but that Cordell Patterson lineup has Jacoby Myers in it, and it takes up the flex spot, and it uses the Jaguars defense, and it's only projected for like 0.3 more.
Yeah.
So it's like, what I had to weigh that decision. I was just never playing Pittman and cash with the numbers that I had compared to if you took out T. Higgins and Devonta Smith and Brandon Cooks and Myers and Beasley, you just remove them from the slate. Yeah, obviously I play Pittman at 5,300 because he's the best price in that range. But based on my numbers, that he wasn't. And I didn't know how owned he would. I thought Godwin, Higgins would be. I thought Godwin, Higgins, Ridley would be the most owned until Ridley was out. So it's like, I'm not getting rid of Higgins. I'm not getting rid of Arnold. I'm not getting rid of Godwin. I'm not getting rid of Henderson. I'm not getting rid of Smith. I'm not getting rid of Hurts. So what am I left with? Not getting rid of the Washington defense. So I'm left with the 2v2. So like, what do? And I went with the numbers.
This is what I would have built if I'd played cash. I would have started with DeAndre Swift, Cooper Kupp, Daryl Henderson, Chris Godwin, and Michael Pittman. Like those would have been the first 5.
Why? But why Pittman?
Because of ownership. Because that's how I build cash game lineups. So
okay, on your decision side. Remember, on your right. Understand? I get what you're saying. You had Michael Pittman higher on than T. Higgins, and I had T. Higgins higher on than Michael Pittman.
The next one that I would have put in was T. Higgins. So I would have had a 4 wide receiver lineup if I built. I misspoke on that. I wouldn't have done Cordell Patterson. Because even after I reran ownership, Cordell Patterson still was not projecting as.
How do you fit that in? You can't even fit that lineup in with Cooper Kupp.
Yes, you can, because you can use Mac Jones at QB.
Well, I thought you said you're locking in Jalen Hurts, the quarterback.
No, not Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, I think, like, if you have the money to do that, yeah, you put in Jalen Hurts. But I have Mac Jones projected fine, and getting all the highest owned position players, I think, is more important than the quarterback. I typically put in.
I could agree conceptually with that.
And then you have Dan Arnold, and then you have the Washington defense, and that fits. That's 49-6, 400 left on the table. And that would have gotten mostly that would have cashed, right? Yeah, because Mac Jones did okay. But I understand for you, certainly not having Michael Pittman. I totally understand that.
Right.
And even if you sort by your percent owned. So let's go through this with your percent owned.
With my percent owned, I Cooper Kupp at 24.
Yeah.
Godwin at 24. T. Higgins at 20. I DJ Moore at 18. I thought DJ Moore would be 18% owned in the middle.
Yeah.
And I still thought he was and I still thought that was under owned.
Yeah.
I had Michael Pittman at 18, AJ Brown at 16, Brandon Cooks at 16, and Brandon Cooks came in at 5%.
Yeah.
So really, to me, I think the reason I didn't play Cooks in cash, the Cooks lineup was the better projected line. If I'm siding between a 2v2, what?
I'm not playing a Houston wide receiver in cash.
Well, that's the point that I'm making. If I have a very small projection difference, I'm gonna side with the better offense. I mean, either you side with the higher owned guy or the better off. That's typically how I go.
Right.
But Pittman was 4th out of that list. So I'm never getting to, I'm just not getting to Pittman.
Sure.
And there's not, and there's not the thing that I don't get about his ownership is that there's nothing in comparison to that range of wide receiver that warrants it. There's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
There's absolutely nothing that warrants it, because I could switch. I'm gonna switch to let's see. I'm gonna switch to another projection set. Okay. And then I'm gonna go to wide receiver. Okay, I'm gonna go to that salary range. Michael Pittman, 5th. Okay, this is another popular projection source within the industry. Okay. We'll go through all those receivers. Brandon Cook, 16.5. Devonta Smith, 14.4.
Yep.
Michael Pittman, 15.2. T. Higgins, 15.9. Jacoby Myers, 14. Cole Beasley, 12. So a little bit more closer to yours. Not as high on Jacoby Myers.
Mm-hmm.
DJ Moore, DJ Moore, 18.8. So DJ Moore still projected very well here.
Yeah.
So it's even with these numbers, there's no reason why Michael Pittman should be twice as owned as anyone else on there's still nothing here. And then I'm going to go to our gridiron IQ projections for RotoGrinders. These are parts of my aggregate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to wide receiver, go to that salary range. Brandon Cooks, 15.38. Devonta Smith, 14.36. Pittman, 15.12. Higgins, 15.43. Myers, 14.22. Beasley, 12.6. So still Higgins still projects better in all of these for 100 less than Pittman.
Yeah.
In all of them. Right. In all of them. Then I'm going to go to the blitz. And you could see where my aggregate is moving because the blitz is going to be higher on the people that I'm higher.
Yeah.
So we go to the blitz and we go to wide receiver. I have Brandon Cook, 17.7. Devonta Smith, 14.8. Michael Pittman, 13.1. Higgins, 14.36. Jacoby Myers, 15.88. Cole Beasley, 12.5. So based on these numbers, it like even if you were just use the blitz, you'd be looking at me and agreeing completely,
Yeah.
and go, why would you play him in general? Because Devonta Smith outprojects him, right? Brandon Cook projects him by 4.5 points for only 400 more. Like, but I don't go by just one projection set. So I aggregate them all. But even if like in none of the ones that we looked at had Pittman higher projected than Higgins. Literally none of them. I just went through them. So why is Higgins half as owned as Pittman? Like I mean, from a numbers standpoint.
Yeah.
Like there's how could you look at those numbers? And I'm not psychologically how the field is reacting. I'm not questioning that. People do irrational stuff. Or from a numbers perspective, you can't with a straight face look at say everything is factored into projections, and I'm going to play Pittman over Higgins. And they're like, they very similar ranges. Like if you played one over the other, like we're talking about ranges that are very close to each other. That's the main reason. That's what we're talking. That's the concept we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's not whether Pittman was a good play or Higgins was a good play or Cooks was a good. There's no such thing as a good play. These are all ranges of outcomes. Look at the floor versus the ceiling. Like their one standard deviation outcomes are going to be somewhere between 6 and 23. And literally all of them are in that range. Like all of these guys are going to score between 6 and 23. So if they're all going to be close enough, there's no reason why one should be 3 times, 4 times more owned than another guy. That's the concept that we're saying. So I go back into this stuff and I go like, this is the reason why I didn't play him. So I don't see anything I would have changed differently. If like, dude, if none of the projections had him better than Higgins and half of them had Myers better than him in raw points and Devonta Smith better him in raw points and Cook's better than him in raw points, why would I play a 27% owned 5K receiver when I could easily just play any of these other guys?
Yeah,
Pittman has 10 catches for 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like that's not something like obviously his second touchdown 30 minutes in the slate. I'm like, okay, just close the line.
Yeah, just ran like
I was already swapping my cash lineup at that point, right? I was already swapping. But these are the things that I'm not looking back at and going, what could I have done differently? It's like I look and I go, I don't see how any reasonable person with any amount of logic would have made any other decision. Now, if you were playing a stack, if you were playing Wentz, Pittman, Brown, and got different elsewhere, like I bless you, you won GPPs yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that. The point that I was making before about Pittman and Brown was more that I wasn't going to play them as one-offs, and I thought that the Titans Colts game was over-owned, which based on my numbers it was. So like
based on my numbers it was, and I really liked that game.
Right, exactly. So it's like I'm not going to like I have a bad slate, catch 0 out of 20, and I look back and I go, I don't know. I wouldn't have done anything. There's nothing I would have done differently. Mm-hmm. The game that I went the most on that had the highest variance put in the low result. And like that's them's the breaks. That's what happened. I was light on the Bills. I was heavier on the Rams. I had a Ram in like every lineup of mine. So I had Kupp, I had Woods, I had Henderson, I had Higbee in one line. I mean, like I had Stafford stacks. I had Stafford plus Kupp plus Wood plus Cooks. Right? Beautiful. I had Henderson plus Cooks lineups. Beautiful. The only problem is I have Carolina, Atlanta smattered around everywhere. Right. It's just like it's a DJ Moore one-off. It's a Robbie Anderson one-off. It's a Russell Gage one-off. And then also I don't have AJ Brown and I don't have Michael Pittman. And then the Godwin stuff, I have to since I'm down, I have to take out Godwin out of my lineup. So now the lineups get even worse.
Yeah.
right? Because the Godwin is chalk. So I'm like, I got to get him out. I'll play Cortland Sutton. I'll play, go up and down at tight end, get Dan Arnold out of these lineups. So that obviously didn't work out. But based on the ownership and based on the numbers, there's nothing. I don't change anything based on my numbers. But even based on your numbers, Carolina, Atlanta, if I told you that DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and Sam Darnold were all going to be single-digit owned, even based on your numbers, you would say that they're under-owned.
Oh, I love that. I thought that was a game worth attacking. Because I agree with you. I mean, if it's like...
No, but to be clear, no, James, I only because I see some of the chat. It's not a game worth attacking. It's a game worth attacking not because you think the game is going to go off. It's because the chances of the game going off versus the ownership is like it's not like I looked at Colts Titans and said, this game ain't going off. I ain't playing it. It's just like compared to the ownership, it's not as the Bills, especially. I saw the Bills ownership with the Dolphins. The Dolphins defense is pretty good, right? And the Bills didn't project well for their prices other than Beasley. So I'm like, I don't know why Allen's going to be the highest owned quarterback here. Yeah, I don't understand why Emmanuel Sanders is going to be. I don't get this. Doesn't mean the Bills can't go out and put up 56 points. It's just that for their ownership, it's over. The ownership is over the probability. Well, so I just want to clear that up when you say like that was a good spot to attack. If the Carolina, if DJ Moore was 37% owned and Robbie Anderson was the cheap chalk 22%, like I would have had none of the game.
Yeah.
So it's not the decision is not made by what do I think is going to happen. It's like compared to their ownership. So like we both agree that if the cards would have flipped up at 1:00 and I would have looked at DJ Moore being 8% owned and said, I thought he was under owned at 18. Mm-hmm. If I knew he was going to be 8% owned, maybe he would have been in 18 out of 20 of my lives instead of just 12, right? I would have actually wanted more of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we think about those things, the same thing with the Bills, you also have to consider the price of it. I mean, the prices on Carolina were pretty good, all things considered. Cordell Patterson did not get a price bump. Kyle Pitts at $6K, that's maybe a little bit pricey, but like, especially with no Calvin Ridley, that's a pretty good price. Calvin Ridley was not high priced enough. When you look at the Bills, because I wanted some Stephon Diggs. Like I wanted some Emmanuel Sanders. I ended up with Emmanuel Sanders in one of my secondaries. But I wanted Stephon Diggs. And when I looked at his price versus my projection for him, I'm not playing him at that price because he just didn't project well enough for me to have him. Like, I'd rather play DK Metcalf. I'd rather play Terry McLaurin. I'd rather play AJ Brown. I'd rather play
Cortland Sutton. You had like 7 million points probably projected for Cortland Sutton.
No, Jerry Jeudy came back. So Cortland Sutton took a big
destroyed
hit.
Everything.
Yeah, that ruined everything.
Who is the guy? Who is the guy? Now everyone wants to know, right? Every week, who's the guy that you're like, this is going to be weird. This guy was projected like 800 points more than anyone else.
Yeah, and it was T.Y. Hilton this week. I had him projected at like, I think 15 or something like that, which was over.
Yeah, I know that. I had him at 9. Well, no, the Blitz had him at 9.9.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that I was over on that because he was like, when you look through the things, like he kind of stuck out there. But again, like that Colts game, one of the reasons why I didn't understand the Pittman ownership was because I had T.Y. Hilton like basically right next to him. So, 18% owned on Michael Pittman, sure, that's over-owned. 28% on Michael Pittman is hilarious. And I had him, like I had a Colts lineup. I had my best lineup was Carson Wentz with Michael Pittman and T.Y. Hilton. And I brought it back with AJ Brown. Super basic, the most obvious,
right, which is fine. Stack what if you want. If I was playing 150 lineup set, I would have had some of the. I mean, I would have had that like similar to that. It's just that I probably wouldn't have had Pittman as a one-off in other lineups.
No, agreed.
Right. So as part of a stack, obviously the game goes off and you want all the correlated pieces. I get it.
But it's the weird thing because like Michael Pittman is 28% owned. AJ Brown is only 19% owned and Carson Wentz is only 9% owned. So like, were people really just plugging in Michael Pittman?
Yes.
Why?
Well, that's the point that I'm making. Why do you think that's the point?
It's so weird.
If you would have told me Michael Pittman was 15% owned, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'd be like, it's close enough to the line that it'd be whatever. But I mean, I projected him for 18% ownership and thought he was over-owned at that point, and then it was even way more owned.
So it was just I thought that this slate, I liked this slate before the Calvin Ridley and Jamal Williams news. And then after that, I was like, all right, we're just gonna hit a 3v3. That's what this slate is now. Because there's DeAndre Swift, there's Daryl Henderson, there's AJ Brown, there's Michael Pittman. I like those guys. I thought were pretty much you just plug them in. If you're going to have just a couple lineups, just plug those guys in and just move on. I did not see Mike White throwing for 400 yards. So egg on my face for thinking that the Jets wouldn't do that. I did say that I thought the Bengals didn't deserve to be 11-point favorites. I did not think that Michael Carter would have almost double bonuses in a game against anyone. So that was weird. It was kind of a weird slate. And when all the chalk hits, it's so funny, man. Like Monday morning when all the chalk hits and everybody's like, look at these screenshots. Look at these screenshots. All of our subscribers, all the chalk hit. Like, yeah, there's going to be some screenshots, man. That's my favorite part of Monday mornings. I just like seeing all the screenshots of like the same players in every single lineup and people taking victory laps on what were obviously the most obvious plays.
Yeah, if you stack that game, that was fun. I mean, you stack the game, you play Daryl Henderson, you play, you find some cheap running back, which Michael Carter. Yeah, my projections were high on Michael Carter and Eli Mitchell, even Eli Mitchell on DraftKings.
I really liked Eli Mitchell. Yeah, 5,400. He was a really good play this week.
Right, I just couldn't get Michael Carter out of tons of lineups. Like Michael Carter, I had let's see, my aggregate. Where's Michael Carter? Where'd he go? I had Michael Carter at 13.2. What did you have?
Way lower. I mean, I didn't have the Jets projected to score anything.
Well, you have to have them projecting to score something. They did 14 implied team total.
I think around 8. They had a team total, but like they also are a team that in a small sample, because the Jets have not been to the red zone very often, have been passing in the red zone. And Michael Carter is in there with a running back by committee. Like there was no way that I was going to get Michael Carter project for anything respectable. I would have played a number of running backs over him. I'd have played, let's see, how much did he cost?
Michael Carter was 4,900.
4,900. Okay. So I would have much preferred Zach Moss over him.
No, but well, that's the reason why on Overzet's show last week, I was like, nope, not playing Moss. I have Moss at 12.3.
I had him at 12.16. So
okay, he's 400 more.
No, but for you, absolutely. Michael Carter, like the better play. For me, like I'm not touching Michael Carter based on the way that I run my projections. So
right. I had Eli Mitchell. I had Eli Mitchell at 14.7.
I had Eli Mitchell at 14.16.
Okay, so not bad. How about Alex Collins?
12.1.
13.4. So that's why I was getting more Alex Collins.
Sure.
And then what the hell? Okay, here's a talking point. What the hell did you do with the Eagles' backfield?
I didn't fucking touch him. Excuse my language, but like, how are people going to play Kenneth Gainwell? I don't get it. Like, I ended up with Kenny Gainwell and some of my. I think I had him in 2 or 3 lineups. I don't like,
but I'm not going to play like Kenny Gainwell came in at 17% owned in the Millie.
The Eagles have never, ever given one running back the work when their main back goes down. Since like freaking LaShawn McCoy. I mean, if you're still living like in the LaShawn McCoy era, okay, sure. They have one running back. They don't even want to give Miles Sanders all of the work. They still mix in Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell when they have a feature back. And in the past like 4 years of this, we have this data where if they have a back go down, the next game, they run by committee and they bring up Jordan Howard, and Jordan Howard scores 2 touchdowns on the half-inch line, has more touchdowns than he has yards. And then they use running back by committee. They never go with just one feature back.
If the thing to comment is not, see, you're describing an absolute.
I'm describing a circumstance. I'm describing
right, but I'm rephrasing it to you couldn't be confident that Kenny Gainwell was going to get the work that he's projected for.
Sure. Yep.
That's it. So the projection is fragile. So even if you put him in and you go, okay, maybe Boston Scott gets X, Kenny Gainwell gets X, but more of the better touches because he'll catch the ball in the backfield. Jordan Howard, let's just say he gets 3 1-yard carries and you project him for that. Like the fragility of that situation means that you'd be more inclined. Like we take a look at Boston Scott. Boston Scott in the Millie was 1.4% owned. Gainwell was 17% owned. So it's the similar situation we talked to about Pittman and then the several 5K receivers in that range. It's like all their ranges, even if you want to argue that Michael Pittman's range is slightly higher, it doesn't warrant being 4 times more owned than 4 other receivers in that range.
Yeah. Kenny
Gainwell and Boston Scott are similarly priced. I think Scott was cheaper, right?
He was cheaper. He was 4,400. Kenneth Gainwell
4,400. Gainwell was 5,000. If I would have told you that Gainwell was 17% owned and Boston Scott was 1.5% owned, the situation is fragile enough that if you were forced to choose one of them,
right? You
choose Boston Scott, but it's quite possible that you just say, screw. Why am I playing a 17% on Gainwell at all? Doesn't mean it doesn't mean you play Scott. It doesn't mean you play Howard. It just means you just avoid the Eagles running back situation in its entirety. If you told me Kenny Gainwell was 2% owned, 3% owned, 4% owned, and you played him and said, I'm going to bet no one knows what's going to happen in the Eagles backfield. I'm going to take a chance.
That's fair.
On a 4. That's fair. That's the point. So anyone that rostered Boston Scott yesterday was smart to do so. If you were going to roster anyone from the Eagles backfield, it's perfectly fine to roster. And if you're going to take a shot, you take a shot with Boston Scott. But I thought Kenny Gainwell would be. I thought 10%.
I thought 12.
I put 10, and I thought that was generous. I thought maybe he'd end up coming in at like 6 to 8% though.
I had him at 12.65. And he was for my leverage, he was 12.65% too high owned. I didn't think he should have been played at all. I mean, that was amazing to me. I thought
he shouldn't be played at that ownership. And you can make a case for any player that's going to see the field that's at some 0.001 own. I mean, there's a case.
Sure. If you have a bunch of lineups, sure, you can take some shots. But yeah, that situation, people talked themselves into. I had somebody ask me in the Discord, how much should I spend of my fab on Kenneth Gainwell? And I audibly laughed. And I was like, none.
It's season long. Who cares about season long anything?
Well, I mean, I agree with that. But like, people wanted this to be Eli Mitchell, I think. People wanted.
We didn't even know if Eli Mitchell was going to be Eli Mitchell. It's a fragile. It's just, all it is that it's not a being right or wrong. Like I want to get away from being right or wrong. It's a fragile situation, and whichever way it goes, there's a chance of you being wrong. So your confidence in how much resources you put into it should be commensurate with the risk that you're taking.
Right.
So to go in and say, oh, Kenneth Gainwell is going to be, the lead back 80% of the snaps for the next month. Like you can't be that confident. So if the rest of the field is sticking the same thing, you should go, I realize how fragile this is. I'm not going to be as high as the market.
I also want people to start thinking about the price of a player being their ownership and not so much of their salary. Because the salary is built in, like if you think that the projections that you use are very good, like for you, right? Like with your aggregate. They've been successful for me for years. So yes, I agree. Right. Yeah. So with your aggregate, if you see that somebody is obviously overpriced for their projection, you're not even really considering them anyway, right? Like you don't really want to play them unless you do something like you did with Michael Pittman and AJ Brown, where you have a circumstance. But like
the higher owned they are, that means just the rest of your lineup has to be somewhat different. So you can fit them in. It's just a matter of identifying those situations so you're not stuck with 7 million% ownership.
But you can think about the price of a player. You can think about the price of Kenneth Gainwell as 13% owned. And you can think about that across an entire lineup as well. In the same way that you can think about him with a median projection. I think that we are almost to the point now where and I mean, I've been saying this for a year. I do think that we're at the point where ownership is more important than projections because everybody has projections. But I do think that it would help a lot of people to think to themselves and say, okay, the price of Alvin Kamara is 9% owned. Do I want to pay 9% owned for Alvin Kamara? In a lineup that has a whole bunch of other pieces that have, you already know what you're projecting for the other things. Do you want to pay the price of 16% for Joe Mixon rather than paying for his projection, which if you're considering him in a lineup already, you already think that he projects fine. So do you want to pay the price of the ownership? I think it would help a lot of people to think that way because you can avoid things like Kenneth Gainwell, where you see that he's going to be 13% owned, and even optimistic projections had him at like a projection of 13 around there. Do you want to pay 13% ownership on somebody who doesn't even have, who might have a ceiling of like 22 within a standard deviation? Do you want to pay that ownership? Think about things that way when you're considering situations, and then you can really start to think about the fragility of the situation rather than the actual projection itself. Because if the projections are good and if you're considering players, you already know that you want to build a lineup that projects well. How much ownership do you want to pay? What is the price that you want to pay on the ownership next? And then also consider that before you make a final decision.
No, I dude, you're talking to the person that's essentially what I'm playing.
Well, I'm talking to all of the YouTube watchers as well.
I mean, the way that you put it is smart. And Jacob Calloway in chat even says so. No, I like the way that you phrase that. He says the cost is the ownership, not the salary. The salary is just the constraint in the optimization process.
Right.
So you're not necessarily thinking about how good of a play this guy is for projected points at this price. You have to assume that guy, you're not the only one that's seeing that. So like it comes down to efficient ownership. If a guy is X price, if Christian McCaffrey healthy is $5,000, right? And he's 90, what you basically have to figure out what is it his efficient ownership at that price. His efficient ownership at that price may be 90%.
Yeah.
And it's not 100% because it's NFL football, and this is still very Christian McCaffrey can fail. Even if he get injured. Like let's say min price running back 4,000. This ain't like basketball. This ain't like min price point guard playing 40 minutes in basketball where their failure rate is like 2%.
It was min price Gordon Hayward. That's the exact situation.
Right. But even then, his efficient ownership was probably 97% owned. Like not the whole way there. It's somewhere over there.
Yeah.
So let's say Christian McCaffrey's min price running back 4,000. We're gonna walk into his normal, his old school normal 100% of snaps, and he's 4,000. Well, what is his efficient ownership? If you think his efficient ownership is 100%, like essentially then you should either be playing them in all your lineups or none of your lineups, right? If you think his efficient ownership is 90% and he's going to be owned at 95%, that doesn't mean you don't play him. You don't think he's over-owned, so you X him out. It's just that those three variables combined is the cost of what Jacob is saying is the cost of the player. That triangle of price, salary, and ownership, like that is the cost. So like if Christian McCaffrey is minimum price and he's only going to be 10% owned, he doesn't cost 4,000. He costs 4,000 at 10%, which is so ridiculously cheap for probably a 27-point projection that you should probably have him in 100. You should literally lock button. Like that's just, that's a value you'll never get. But it has nothing to do with him being 4,000. It has to be doing with him being 4,000 and only 10% owned. If he's 4,000 and 90% owned, he probably ends up in about 90% of your line. Like there are lineups that you can make without him. And as he goes down in ownership from 90 to 80 to 70, the more reasons you should you're not going to get a better value on the entire slate. And it's not the salary, it's the ownership difference. So like we talk about Michael Pittman today, that's what that triangle of salary to ownership and price, like in comparison to other players in that range, he costs too much. right? Like it's well, he was 5,300. Yeah, but I mean, he was Brandon Cooks for 400 more was 5% owned. Brandon Cooks cost less. If you want to put into those terminologies, like if you told me that Brandon Cooks was 5% and Pittman was 25%, and Brandon Cooks is 400 more, most people would say, "Oh, Brandon Cooks costs 400 more." I said, "No, he actually costs less."
Right.
Right. From a winning a GPP, from the game aspect of DFS, he actually costs less. You go up to, let's say, I'm going to go to other wide receivers. I love the way that you put this concept. We put it in the course, but not like exactly worded this way.
Yeah.
If Deontay Johnson is 6,700. I don't know what he was on, but let's just say, DK Metcalf. Let's use you use that example. DK Metcalf, I had him as 3% owned. I don't know what he ended up being. DK Metcalf is 6,800 at 3% owned. Michael Pittman was 5,300 at 26% owned. From a game aspect, DK Metcalf costs less.
Yeah.
Right? From what we're talking about with that triangle. Like the cost of playing DK Metcalf versus his success rate versus ownership, even though it was 6,800, he costs less to play.
Yep.
The salary is only just because you have to put 9 slots in a lineup. And you try to get the most amount of projected points. But since he costs less, he gains you more by playing him than by playing Pittman. So that means he costs from a strategic standpoint less. So if you lock him in and don't play Pittman, your lineup may actually be your lineup may actually project 3 points lower than the Pittman lineup, but it's also owned 40 to 50% lower than the Pittman lineup. So it technically costs less because it has less ownership. Are those good ways of putting it? Because to use the word cost, is there another way to, or is that the best way to say it so people don't view the salary as like, oh, people look at point per dollar and go, well, that means everything. It's like, well, is that versus the ownership also?
Yeah. And my big thing that I always try to do, I try to get people to look less at projections and more at ownership. The projection is important, but once you have already built a lineup, like you've moved past the projection, you have to figure out another way to assess how valuable your lineup is. And I think cost really is the best way to say it. The example that I would use, like if you go back to DK Metcalf, if DK Metcalf is 3% owned, what did he end up being?
He ended up being 5.6 in the middle.
Okay, sure. So DK Metcalf, if you have him projected for 5% owned, and he has a projection of 18 fantasy points, and you have right next to him, say, Chris Godwin, projected for 19 fantasy points. So you have a 1 point difference here. Chris Godwin, I don't know.
Godwin came in at 24%. At 24.
Massively highly up, right? The cost of rostering DK Metcalf at 5% owned, even with a 1 point lower projection, is about twice as cost efficient. Cost efficiency, I think, is the best way to say this, right?
Right.
He's twice as cost efficient as Chris Godwin is. Who was it? Devontae Smith comes in at 5% owned.
Right.
And he projects for the same as Michael Pittman. But Michael Pittman is 30% owned. You're entering almost like 10 times more cost efficient to have Devontae Smith and Michael Pittman. Now, when we say these things, it's not just a 1v1. You need to build a lineup for this.
Right.
But when you think about things that way, it would be insane to play if you have a 1v1 decision and you have Devontae Smith versus Michael Pittman, and you say, oh, well, they both cost the same, they both project the same, they don't cost the same.
You take the one with the lower ownership every time.
Every single time in a 1v1.
It's free EV. It's free money. It's
every time in a 1v1. Yep.
Right.
Yep. So that's what we're trying to get across here. The cost efficiency of a player is not based on their projection or their value. It's based on how owned they are against the other ones in their range.
And that's also the reason why, depending on the contest you play, like I take a look at DeAndre Swift, and do you think DeAndre Swift in the Wildcat and the slant was 40 to 42% owned? I think his efficient ownership was probably close to that. I
35,
think DeAndre Swift
35.
Yeah, okay, but I'll give you 35.
Sure.
So if you put his efficient ownership at 35, that means he's over-owned in the Wildcat by a little bit.
Yep.
But in the Millie, he was 23% owned. In the play action, he was 17% owned.
Yeah.
Like if you were playing the Millie and you wanted to jam a ton of Swift, like the cost of playing Swift was so much lower in the Millie than it is in the Wildcat.
Yeah.
Same for Daryl Henderson. Daryl Henderson was 35 in the Wildcat, 22 in the Millie. So he cost less in the Millie. But the salary's the same, but the cost efficiency, the cost opportunity was less there. Godwin was about even the whole way through. So like, it didn't matter what contest you were kind of playing. Pittman was actually a little bit higher owned in the Millie than he was Wildcat. He was still 22% owned with defenses. The Washington football team defense in the Wildcat was 25% owned. In the Millie was 21% owned. And with the immense amount of variance at defense, no defense should ever be. There's no single defense ever be that owned in any situation. We had last week when they mispriced the Cardinals at 3,100. It's like, I'm just going to lock them in. It's like, dude, no defense may be worth more than 10% ownership.
Pro tip for defense, just set their exposure to 10% and just run.
Just run it. Right?
don't do anything other than that.
But that's a perfect example of the concept of like, no matter what you think you could project for defense, like, but people accept. See, that's the weird thing, James. People accept. I think more people accept that for defense.
Yeah,
like we say that concept of like defense is extremely variant. I'll look at my defense projections here, and everyone will be somewhere between like 4 and 8. Right? It'll be like something, right? Mm-hmm. Like you take a look at these numbers. Yeah, some are lower. The Dolphins were at 3 and the Texans were at 2. But like for the most part, everything's like the Washington football team is 5.76. But I got like Eagles at 6.08, Bears 6.1, Colts 5.3, Chargers 6.4, Broncos 7. I mean, it's like all these have like very similar ranges, and people accept. And it's like, oh yeah, on defense, like yeah, I understand why you don't play the chalk defense. Yeah, but then what I just explained for the defense is exactly what we went over with all those 5K wide receivers.
Yep.
Right? Like, here are all these defenses from 5 to 8, right? And they're all owned different. And one is more than the other guy. They like for no like they're the best play by point little, but the variance is this. Yep. Well, in the wide receiver range, we're doing the same thing. But everyone's projected from 12 to 16. And there's 8 guys to choose from. Why are you playing the Washington football team defense? Well, why are you playing Michael Pittman? I mean, to me, it's the same. Aren't I saying exactly the same thing when we're talking about defense with the wide receivers?
Yeah, you are. And like, even when you look at the ranges of wide receivers, because like the range of defense, I would argue is probably highest in anything. But like, when you look at the range of the wide receivers, I run up through 2 standard deviations for my ceilings, but then I reduce it back down a little bit. Michael Pittman only had a ceiling like 3 points higher than anyone else in that range. And
that's a 2 standard deviation ceiling.
Yes, 2 standard deviations up. So
typically most of floor and ceiling shows 1 standard deviation.
Yeah. I actually, it was interesting. I had to go back because I run through 2 standard deviations, but I use 1 standard deviation to adjust through the 2. I did it in a weird way, but that's conversation for another day. Regardless, the same conversation can be had anytime. And remember, I want to hammer this home. This is for 1v1s. This is for vacuum conversations. Michael Pittman versus Devontae Smith, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you're doing a stack, rules are a little bit different. But when you're looking for your secondary correlations, when you're looking for your one-offs, it is insane to play anybody that is higher owned than another person with the same projection. Right. Just don't do it. You never, ever have a reason to do it. And then if you do it and it works, then you reinforce this really, really bad habit. And if you don't do it and it kills you, like it killed Jordan, like it killed myself, like we can look at it and say, oh, well, we thought Michael Pittman was going to be over-owned at 18% owned. So he comes in at 28% owned. And we're both looking at it like, I had one lineup where I get those 2 touchdowns early. And the other two, those lineups die. And I'm like, well, I'm not mad about only having one lineup with Michael Pittman. I'm happy that I have one, but like, I wouldn't have played him as a one-off at 28% owned. There's no way.
Right. And you're looking over time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have, like, too many people look in the aspect of one slate. Oh, but I knew that was going to happen. It's like, oh, how, like, no one's that good.
You didn't know anything.
Right? You don't know anything, right? I mean, there are plenty of people there. James, there are plenty of people that had Wentz plus Pittman plus Brown plus Taylor plus Gainwell plus Emmanuel Sanders one-off.
Yep.
And didn't cash.
But they knew it was going to happen.
Right. So, but I'm going to play all the chalkiest guys, even the fragile guys, play Emmanuel Sanders at 20%, play Kenny Gainwell at 14%, and then not even cash getting the individual 1v1s. Right. Like, that's kind of the point that you're making.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly the point I'm making.
Like, I'm not beating my chest over like, oh my God, I had so much Michael Carter at 7%. Dude, I didn't cash a single lineup because, like, what does it matter? I had Carter and Mitchell in a bunch of lineups that have zeros, have literally have receivers with zeros in them.
I missed the cash line by 2 points on that Michael Pittman lineup. I didn't cash with Michael Pittman. I didn't cash with a Michael Pittman, AJ Brown, Daryl Henderson lineup because I had a zero from Robbie Anderson at 4% owned. But Robbie Anderson at 4% owned is awesome. So I'm not mad about it.
Right. I would have been mad if Robbie Anderson was 18% owned.
Oh, I'd have been livid.
Right. I would have been like, oh, I made
this lineup is Carson Wentz at 9%, DeAndre Swift at 40, Daryl Henderson at 30, AJ Brown at 20, Michael Pittman at 30, and Kyle Pitts at 20. If Robbie Anderson ends up anywhere over 10%, this lineup is trash, and I should not have played it. But I had Robbie Anderson and T.Y. Hilton at 2% and the Saints at 1%. So I'm fine with that. But any of those guys get over 10%, terrible. Hate this
right, you're
lineup.
Screwed, right? Because then now you're playing a lineup with almost no relative value whatsoever.
Right.
Okay, well, we talk about a lot of this type of stuff in the theory of DFS Masterclass. 15 hours long, so you don't have to go back and watch all of these episodes, and all the concepts are in one structured place. Game objectives, player selection, expected value, leverage, correlation, construction, risk management, exploit psychology, miscellaneous. How to think like a professional DFS player. You know, you think long term. Yeah, I had a horrible slate yesterday, but the week before I had a great slate, and the week before that I had a horrible slate, and the week before that I had a great slate. I mean, like, it is what it is. That's the reality of DFS. Like, if you could profit, if you're playing cash / GPP, like 58% of the time, like, you're elite. Like, that's what DFS is. You're not going to win every week. You actually go in expecting to lose.
Yep.
Because you're not going to win every week. So go to theoryofdfs.com to pick that up. James Pater _DFS. And people could get, now that your Court and Slutton projections are back down to normal, they go to your website and get parts of your model, right?
Yeah. PaterDFS.com. And I have projections for every single sport. And this week, and I'm sure through the rest of the NFL season, things have pretty much normalized. Like, I looked at the projections and I had a hard time figuring out who I was going to be super over on. And it was T.Y. Hilton when we got to it. So yeah, you'll find all those projections, and the NBA optimizer, which I just retooled to be pretty unique and interesting. So I'm pretty excited about that. And yeah, just excited for the rest of the main sports season, and then working into esports starting up again early next year.
And we just found out Joel Embiid is going to be sitting today.
Yay,
he's
NBA.
He's doubtful. NBA, welcome to the NBA, where you don't even bother making a lineup until 10 minutes before.
I'm so tired of it already. Anyway.
Okay, so you can follow James at Pater _DFS, me at Blender HD. Hit that thumbs up button on your way out the door. I will be back later today on this channel, so hit the notification bell. I'll be on with Dean and Stevie for NBA Grinders Live at 5:20 Eastern, and then I'll be back on with Will, I believe, at 7:30 for the NFL pre-lock show for Monday Night Football, and then I'll be back tomorrow to talk about it all, because that's what we do here. Talk about DFS strategy. Answer your questions in the YouTube chat on the DFS pregame show on RotoGrinders.com.